You're listening to Accounted For, the Canadian podcast that explores the intangibles of every career. I'm your host, Daniel Lee. Hello, welcome back to Accounted For. This is a podcast on a mission to expand your perspectives, have you question the default option, and get you inspired to action for your own career. Man, that's a handful of stuff to say. But regardless, happy Wednesday, everyone. Welcome back to Accounted For. Before we begin the podcast, here is a quick service announcement, or not an advertisement, just an announcement. And so this is for people who may be new and also just hardcore fans as well. And if you are looking for a way to help support the podcast by more than just a rating on iTunes, although I do really appreciate it if you do that, now you can buy me coffee. So what does that mean? It doesn't directly mean that you're going to take me out to coffee, although I'm also open to that as well. But I've now created a donation page where you can choose from buying me 1 cup of coffee a month or maybe a coffee a week. Or if you're a super fan or an ultra fan that just really loves me, then you can buy me a coffee every day. And all the money you donate to me will be actually used to buy me coffee, literally. And it'll also be used to buy coffee for the people that I meet to bring them on the platform, whether through the podcast or whether I just learn about something completely different and I write about it. And so I'll help them buy coffee with the money that you give me as well. And everything left over will be used to improve and grow the platform as well. And so you can really think of it as that you're taking me out to coffee to really pick my brain for an hour. But instead of doing that, you're listening to a podcast. Or you could even be taking out one of my esteemed guests out for a coffee. But you might not have access to them, or they might just be busy. And so instead of buying them a coffee, I do that for you. And I buy them a coffee for doing that. So then you can just give me that coffee money. So that's how you can think about it, if that helps. Well, all the content will, continue to be free, but it's just that the donations will really help a bunch in keeping this company of mine afloat and also grow for the future as well. And also for the coffee buyers, you will be part of this unique, stakeholder community that I've built where everyone in the community will receive a weekly email newsletter, and the weekly newsletter will include everything from the essays, learnings, the vlog, and podcast episodes, all packaged up nicely in their inbox every week so that you don't have to run around chasing things. And it'll also give you a chance to ask me questions at my annual meeting next year that I plan to set up. And so these are all kind of continuously developing on the way, but if you would like to be a early helper and supporter of the podcast as well as the overall platform, I would truly appreciate it. And you can check out more details at oldmandan.com/stakeholders. Stakeholder or stakeholders? Try both. I'll also include the links down in the description, so you can just click that too. Okay, cool. Now, getting on to the actual interview itself, today's guest is Marc Champagne. Marc is the co-founder of Kyo. Kyo is a wellness company based in Toronto, and it's currently an app that provides prompts to help you with your mental fitness. A simple way I think about it is as like a live digital journal. And Marc also has a podcast called Kyo Conversations, where he and his guests explore the impact of mental fitness in their lives. And I'm a big believer in the mind and body connection, and just as much as I'm obsessed with my powerlifting career, I'm also obsessed with my mental training as well. So needless to say, I was super excited to chat with Marc. And you might wonder whether Marc's career started out in a spiritual field, given that, he runs a wellness company. But the fact of the matter is that he started in the world of pharmaceutical drugs. And after a decade in the big pharma industry, Marc decided to take the leap with his brother-in-law to scratch his own itch, quote unquote, by transforming his 10 years of journaling practices he's had while being a drug pharma sales rep and actually creating that into Kyo now. And it also turns out being a product manager of mental health drugs can really prepare you well to be an app launching entrepreneur, as Kyo continues to be a globally ranked top app with influencer content from people like Kevin Rose and Leo Babauta, I think. If if you are anyone who's really interested in the mental fitness community, like, these two people are big names, and Marc is definitely working hard to get even more esteemed people on the platform as well. And so this was a super fun and exciting conversation into Marc's journey of creating a wellness company. And I came out of it with personal mindfulness practices for myself and some more perspectives on growing my own company as well. And so I hope my chat with Marc really expands your perspective, has you question the default, and really inspires action in your life. Hey everyone, welcome back to Accounted For. Today on the podcast, we have Marc Champagne. Hey Marc, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, sir. Great to be here.
Marc here is the co-founder of Kyo, or I think it's pronounced Kyo in Japanese, right?
You actually say it proper and better than us, because we've been corrected once by someone actually from Japan, because that's the origin of Kyo. So we say Kyo, but you're right, it's Kyo.
Yeah. It's funny. Like when I first saw it, I was like, "Oh yeah, Kyo. Yeah, today that makes sense."
Yeah.
We're kind of going off on a tangent from the beginning, but it's funny. Like I taught myself Japanese very quickly, and I've just been obsessed with like learning the language. And so when I saw that, I was like, "Oh, nice. I wonder why like they pronounce it Kyo instead of Kyo." Like, is there a reason behind that? Like, is it just for everyone else in North America to just feel more comfortable with the name?
Yeah, well, I think that's a great question, actually. We've never really thought about it. But I think on our side, we're just trying, like, we're as much as we love Japanese culture and we're trying to bring it in every aspect to the company and, like, even our personal lives, like, we also don't want to pretend like we're not Japanese, right? So, I mean, we're kind of putting our own flavor to it, and most people either say Kyo or Kayo. Very rare people actually pronounce it properly, like yourself. And we didn't know at first. That's the thing. We validated that the translation was correct from some people that we knew in Japan. But then it wasn't until after that someone actually said, no, it's pronounced like this. Which wasn't maybe that was 6 months ago. It wasn't that long ago.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's still pretty fresh. And I feel weird if I were to pronounce it like that. I feel like people would be like, "Who are you trying to be?" type thing.
Right. It's the same croissant, and people judge you for that.
Yeah, exactly. We just stick with Kyo.
Got it. And so for the audience who may be confused, like, why are they going off on this company's name? Can you describe your company to them? What does Kyo do? And what are you all about?
Yeah, so Kyo, as you mentioned, is the Japanese word for today. And that was important for us because everything that we're trying to do with Kyo, which is at this stage a wellness company or an ecosystem of offerings to really help people reflect. Our core purpose is really to stimulate reflection. It just so happens that the first product that we developed was is an app, and that came out of kind of a need on my side of one of those scratch your own itch scenarios, just being frustrated with the digital journaling solutions out there. So Kyo app is really two big things. It's a combination of inspiration or content, or in what we call guided prompts or reflective questions that we're pulling from podcast interviews that we're curating with experts around the world and just different topics. And then we're marrying that up with a digitally guided practice. So for anyone that is, trying to create space in their mind, trying to release emotion that may be, winding them up, or that want to practice any type of gratitude practices, then, we provide a solution to do that, either unguided, or if you're having a hard time, don't know where to start, then we have literally 175,000 reflective questions in the app that aren't all served up to you in one shot. They're organized by topic and by podcasts and whatnot. So it's just a way to help people get started in a practice that literally has been around for thousands of years. And from my perspective, I just heard coming up over and over again from people that were being interviewed on shows like Tim Ferriss and pick any of them. They're all asking powerful questions to themselves throughout their life. So we wanted to take that and provide a platform to help people really be at their A game personally and professionally.
Gotcha. And so for someone who wants to reflect and actually have these powerful prompts and questions in their life, how do they get started? Do they just go on, and is there kind of more of a tips for like best practices? Like, are they expected to do it like once a day or once in the morning? Like when I started this whole, I think for me first, like a journaling practice 4 years ago, it started with a 5-minute journal, which is very simple, do the same thing over and over again, and then I learned to change it my own way. How can people start? Like how would you recommend it?
Yeah, I think it's similar to most things, right? Like set yourself up for success, and you're not, if you want to run a marathon, you're not going to just jump right into the marathon. You're gonna scale up to that distance of running through training, right? So it's no different when you think of your mind. If you're not doing something like this, start small, right? And even just a couple minutes a day of potentially setting an intention for the day, like what would make today great, for example, is a really great prompt to just kick off the day. And then if you get to the end of the day or the end of the week, like what went really well today, or what would I have changed today? Like the key, and it doesn't have to be, I mean, obviously, we'd love to have you in the app, but if a digital solution is not your cup of tea, then it's the reflection that is the most important. So if that's pen to paper, or if you're doing an audio note, which you can do obviously in Kyo, or just talking out loud, like it doesn't matter. The key is to stop, and come out of the autopilot, because that's a bit of the issue right now with just where we're at, I think, in society in general, is that, if we don't consciously make the efforts to slow down a bit and think, then we're automatically put on these, just like the airports, those people movers, and it just doesn't stop, right? The tech doesn't stop, the content doesn't stop, the meetings, the calls, like it just keeps going and going. And what happens is, you go Monday to Friday, and then all of a sudden you roll into the weekend, there's like weekend activities, you go to sleep, and it's Monday again, and it's just rinse and repeat. Whereas, there's a lot of great things that happen during those days, right? And there's a lot of answers to the questions actually we may have that, we think we need to buy a self-help book, or we need to go and talk to somebody about. But if we actually slow down and ask some powerful questions and allow the mind to surface those solutions, then there's tremendous benefits to that.
And so that's, you've left it on a very juicy bit, which we'll kind of definitely dig into a little later into the interview. But I also wanted to touch upon something. I nearly commented on it when we first did the interview, but the last name Champagne is really gangster. It's pretty fucking cool.
Nice.
And is that a French Canadian like name? Because I know you're from Montreal. Like you moved to Toronto from Montreal. Is that where you grew up?
No, actually, I'm originally from Northern Ontario.
Northern Ontario. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's actually where all the French comes from. It's just in my past life, I worked for 5 years in Montreal. So actually, born and raised in Ontario. So I'm actually being back in Toronto. I'm back in kind of the home province. But yeah, all the French comes. So I went to, a French immersion school right up until university. For me, the thing was that my parents didn't speak French at home. My dad was French, my mom was not. So we always spoke English. So, I never really kept it up post high school. So I understand, like I can follow a conversation really well or fluently, but the confidence level to actually speak is slowly diminishing.
Mm-hmm. And so, right now we've had that turn where we've talked about this wellness company of yours, and when we first interacted, I thought, yeah, this is really fascinating. He's worked in big pharma for about a decade, and now he's starting this like journaling app focused on like mental fitness and wellness. And then a part of me actually thought that maybe that actually makes sense, that he was in pharma and now he cares about mental fitness. Was like when you were growing up, were you influenced in some way that you should go do big pharma for a decade? Like why, what was the impetus there?
That's a good question. I mean, so as I was growing up, what I was always interested in was just business in general. And that actually wasn't coming from my childhood back home. My dad worked in the mine in Sudbury. My mom worked at the bank. like just very standard jobs in that town. It's a small town. But what was happening, I can't remember the age, it was probably like 7 or 8 for a few years. I used to come to Toronto for the summers, and my aunt and uncle, my uncle was in sales all his life, and my aunt actually had a pretty big position at Sharp Electronics. So I'd come into this like giant city, right? Small town guy coming into Toronto was big. There was a lot going on. And I remember I used to tell my aunt, I said, one day, this is crazy to think because now I can't stand it, but one day, I'm going to be stuck in this traffic and, going to work and working in one of those buildings type thing. Which is hilarious to think. I mean, I don't work in one of those buildings, but I'm down in those buildings often enough and stuck in the traffic often enough. So there was always a desire, though, to be, I guess it was just to kind of leave Sudbury because I don't know, it just didn't fit for me. I had never had any intention to, go into like that blue collar type work. I always wanted to jump into some sort of business and communications and marketing. And that's what I studied in school. So then when I moved out here, I actually moved to London, Ontario, I thought it would have been right before I got married. And just started, I tried a couple jobs. I was just searching for jobs and ended up meeting someone that was in the pharma world, and there was a sales position open and took a chance on me, and I started there. And I always thought from a sales perspective, like that was like the coveted sales job, was to be like a pharmaceutical rep. It's kind of different views now. I mean, I've seen it. I was in it long enough to see a lot of good, but I think anyone listening right now knows that there's also a lot of, there's a big dark side to it as well. And there's some things I, fundamentally have a hard time with, especially at the global level. But at the same time, I saw a lot of good and, literally lives saved and families kind of pulled together because of pharmaceutical access, let's say. But I think what happened was, even in that world, it was always like, it's never just the drug. Like that, depending on the disease, sometimes you need that to intervene, but then you need everything else. And I worked a lot in the mental health side of things, and medications for schizophrenia and bipolar, then at the end depression, Alzheimer's. So there was a lot to do with the mind. But when it came to journaling, there was never a link with that world and my use of journaling. I was doing it purely from a personal level. I was doing it for 10 years because when I first started that job, it was, okay, everyone's going to be trained up in the same way. How can I stand out a bit? So I started getting up a lot earlier than people and started reading and fueling my mind with positive things. And it was through people like Robin Sharma and Tony Robbins and like the Oprahs of the world at that time that, I was consuming their content and their messages. And then, it doesn't take very long to start seeing, oh, well, they're doing this, and that, right? And journaling or reflective writing, whatever you want to call it, was something that kept coming up. And I quickly started practicing it. And just given the job I had, I was traveling a lot. So for me, it always made sense to do it in a digital fashion. Plus, my writing is terrible, so I could never actually read what I was writing. So, and I could type really fast. So for me, it was always started off just in word processors. Then I was using Apple Notes and started transitioning to different apps that were out at the time, and just really grew frustrated with the options that were out there, in the sense of how do you take all this great content or inspiration that I'm already consuming and that all of us are consuming in some respect, and marry it up with this guided practice, which in our case is, prompts really fueling some journaling. So that's how it all came about.
And for context for the listeners who may not be very familiar with their background, so you went to Laurentian University to study business, and then it seemed like you had like a quick stint as a sales rep, and then you went into the big pharma world after that, where you spent like 6.5 years or something in Novartis, and
Otsuka was the last one, and actually there was a lot. I mean, that was a Japanese pharmaceutical company, and there is a link there actually to Kyo, because I was only there for just under 2 years before I left to pursue Kyo full time. But in that time, really quickly when I started, there was a conference in Tokyo that was taking place, and I remember, I'll never forget this. I was there, and I didn't even have a company credit card at that point. I was still kind of onboarding into the system, and my boss was like, there's a big conference in Tokyo. All the main psychiatrists in Canada are going to be there. You should really go because, you'll meet them all in, the course of 3 or 4 days versus traveling across the country for 6 months to meet them. So I went, and I'll never forget. I mean, it's a place, had I been at the company longer, I would have for sure taken vacation and stayed there, but I was basically kind of in and out. But while I was there, I'll never forget. I'd leave my hotel and I was walking to the conference hall, but there was this big temple, outside temple right in the middle. So I would walk. It would be crazy busy. Anyone that's listening that's been to Tokyo it's there's a lot going on, super busy. And then I'd walk through this temple and everything just zened right out, silence. You'd hear the gongs. People were, doing their thing. And it was just such a surreal experience to see this busy, fast-moving, tech-infused city that could just be calmed down in a matter of, as soon as you cross into that temple. And then that you're going to walk right out and, things are going to get a little bit wild again. So the parallel with Kyo was, how can we bring something to people that can bring those type of Zen and mindful moments to anyone, no matter where they're at? No matter if they're living in New York or Toronto or LA, wherever the busy is, you can still find those moments, right? And because I think there is a lot of stereotypes or perceptions around all of these practices that it's people in robes and top of mountaintops, right? Meditating in these majestic locations, right? So, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's great if you can experience that. But for the majority of us, we are stuck in traffic or we're commuting from wherever in the busy. So it's how can you find those moments in the busy, right?
Yeah, and it's funny you bring that up, and it's something I've been consciously trying to implement, but sometimes scares me to do, is actually meditating in public. So I remember, I remember reading about how, a lot of people try to find a quiet place so they can meditate, but if you try to actually meditate in a loud, noisy place, it's actually forcing yourself to try to actually find the calmness amongst the noise, and so it can train you in a completely different way. And so I tried that last week or 2 weeks ago. I was sitting in the Starbucks and I thought, what if I just meditated now? And I just closed my eyes and hopes no one takes my laptop. And so I just did it for 10 minutes. And it's very weird. It's very different. But I could see that it'd be very different if I did it more often. I could feel it being a very different kind of meditation.
Yeah. But if you think about it, right, again, this is where, I'm glad you brought it up, because we're I think as society, we're slowly starting to think this way. But if you draw parallel to physical fitness, right, if you're training for something, that you're not going to get the most out of it if you're just going to do a half-ass run and you're not challenging yourself. So it's no different. If you're going to be in this perfect environment to meditate, that's not reality, right? that your meditation is going to help you down the road if you're in a crazy kind of stressful moment, and it helps you become a little bit more self-aware and pull you out and be less reactive. Well, those scenarios aren't Zen'd out calm scenarios, right? So anyway, all to say though, if you're going from 0 to 1, sure, do whatever it takes to get started. But then as your practice continues to evolve, which it sounds like yours is, challenging yourself like that is super beneficial, right?
Yeah, I think it's another thing where I'm trying to do. After this talk, I think now I'm a little more inspired and motivated to be more uncomfortable, so I'll try to do that a little more often. But it also makes me wonder, when you talked about the time when you're in big pharma and how there's the public perception of what it is. When I was an investor, actually, I looked into Novartis, so I'm relatively familiar with the company and how it's. I think back then when I did the research, it was It's still like a very diabetic, like insulin focused company, isn't it? Like many of the drugs are focused on like insulin and all that stuff.
Maybe at that time. I mean, when I was there,
Well, yeah, it probably constantly changes too, like because of different drugs come in and out. But I guess so. The question I was trying to get at is, did you like pick that you wanted to do focus on like the mental side, like focus on, you know, drugs that focused on like the mental health aspect? Was that something you're cognizantly just gravitating towards naturally?
No, I mean, typically that path is like you really don't have much of a say, especially if you start in sales. You really don't have much of a say on what products you're going to work on. Like you're trying to, especially if you're new, right? Like if you're new, you're coming in and whatever they have at the time, and typically you would start with products that you would be conversing with, like family medicine or family docs and stuff like that. Then as you get more experience, then you're able to start speaking to specialists and whatnot. So I mean, I had medications around osteoporosis, Alzheimer's, hypertension. There was quite a few. It seemed like there was always a vein somewhere linked to the mind. Wasn't intentional, that just happened. I think where you can start specializing, it would be like if I were to want to go back to that world now, having the experience as a sales rep and analyst, and then the brunt of it being product manager. Like that's where I could say, okay, well, I really want to focus in this disease state. Then you have a little bit more say to do that. But, you know, when you start off with kind of no experience, you take what's given type thing.
Mm-hmm. And the sales environment, my imagination is that it's very rowdy and like loud, and it's like a traffic jam in like the nature of the work itself. Is that an accurate assumption? And if that's the case, like how did the journaling and trying to find that presence and stop in your life like really kind of play into all that?
It's actually the reverse. Really? Because the loud kind of salesy, like rah stuff is more internal if, you know, you're at a sales meeting or something like that. But day to day, like you're by yourself in your car and you're going into offices where 80% of the time you can't even see the physician. You know, there's like the receptionist is not letting you in, you're leaving notes. And you know, the core job as a pharmaceutical rep, despite what most people would probably think, is really to educate them on a disease state. And because, you know, like, especially at the family medicine level, you come out of med school. I mean, there's no way you can keep up with the advances in the science. I mean, you can only go to so many speaking events or education seminars and conferences. So as a rep, you would always like, these are the facts. These are the latest studies around this product and this disease state. I'm leaving this with you. If you have any questions, let me know. This is the idea, like in terms of the patient population that this drug is working the best for. You know, here are the details, for example. So if you see those patients, I mean, this is what the research supports. Like that's essentially the job as a sales rep, at least in more modern times. Like I know back in the day, and like the way the movies portrayed, it was like a bit of a Wild West, right? Like, and I was coming in at a time where that time didn't really exist anymore. There was a lot of regulation. Like if I hosted a dinner and brought in a speaker to, again, educate the customers on a disease state, like literally I'd have to count the glasses of wine. Like you'd have 1 or 2 glasses of wine max. And there was a lot of restriction on any type of outside events.
Wow. And
the location, the restaurant, like you could not just go and pick the most expensive restaurant in Toronto. Like that would never fly.
Yeah, that does go to the contrary. Like I always just assume that, if you're a big pharma, they're gonna wine and dine you, and they have all this big money behind you. It's all this glamorous stuff. Like that's what I actually imagined.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely budget there. But at the same time, I mean, it's heavily regulated, and as it should be, right? Because the regulations are in there for a reason. Because at one point it wasn't, and it was a bit of a Wild West, and we're dealing with healthcare, which is super important. Yeah. So then, where the mental fitness came about was really more so dealing with constant rejection. And like, how do you stay motivated when the door is being closed in your face all the time, when you have sales targets and like you're constantly trying to figure out the best way to get the message across, and it's just relationships, right? Like, how do you build a relationship with another human being and get your information across? So that's where journaling, along with other practices, really was helpful to keep a really strong mindset.
And over this kind of decade period, as you've been journaling, you went through this transition after Novartis, you went to Otsuka, and then you left the pharmaceutical world. But all that time, you were constantly journaling every day. And what was that decision process, or kind of the step by like mental frame that you had where you decided to just close its door on this pharmaceutical world? Like, and I feel like it's not like it just kind of happened immediately. You've probably seen something happen throughout the journaling period of you're constantly writing things down, you're meditating, you're thinking, you're reflecting. And what was the lead up to that process?
Sure. Well, it was years of seeing the personal benefit, first and foremost on my own side, just going through different ups and downs and whatnot that I was able to work through leveraging journaling. But then when the idea came up for Kyo, I flipped my brother-in-law, and Sine, who's also the co-founder of the company, an email with my frustrations in my experience with journaling, and just basically said, I laid it out and said, do you want to try building an app? Like, so naive, right? Like, I'm not a developer. He's not a developer, but he had an IT, and still does have an IT business running, where they're building some websites and stuff. So that was like the closest person I knew, and we really got along as family, that had some sort of tech experience, even though it's not what we needed, right? So we started working on it. I mean, it was mind mapping it in the evenings, probably worked on it for a good 6 months. And then we went to the conference that I just came back from in Montreal, C2. She went to that conference 3 years ago, and I was there on behalf of Otsuka. And he came in just kind of on his own dime. I'm like, you'd really like this. It's a fun event, a lot of people. And we ended up booking a ton of meetings with the participants in the conference and started pitching the mock-ups of what we envisioned Kyo to be.
Did you bring slide decks with you, or like a laptop to just show them, like, this is how it's going to go, this is how the flow is going to look?
Yeah, totally. I can't remember if we were even at the point where we were using Envision at that point, which for everyone listening is a really cool like prototyping software that really replicates what the app would look like. I don't think we even had that at that point. It would have been like PDFs, or we might have been using Adobe XD actually. But anyway, we had something, but it was, I remember too, like we had a couple meetings booked, and we were talking to people. Then we got some good feedback, and then we called our designer and like, can you update this and like flip the photo around? Like, we have another meeting in 30 minutes type thing. And he'd update that stuff live, and we'd go in and kind of, it was really an iterative process, like live on the ground. And it was through that experience that, like, you know what, because that was the first time that we talked to others outside of, our friends and family on what this was. And we started to see that there was some validation there, and people were interested and could see where we were trying to go. And then that's where the decision was actually made that either I go all in on this, or it's just not going to go anywhere. And I had enough experience on the pharma side as a product manager to know that, we would need a solid brand plan, and a network of people to actually get this out, because, we could have just built it, and put it out in the App Store, which for anyone building apps is a tremendous feat. We didn't know that, but we could have just did that and just seen if people were going to actually download the thing, right? But to me, like, that wasn't really a strategy. So in order to put a strategy together, actually took a lot of pharmaceutical strategies. Like, how do we bring together some big influencers in the space and start talking to them and interview them and get their buy-in, so that when we were actually ready to launch, which is no different than launching a drug. I mean, you go and you speak to, if you're going to launch a medication in in psychiatry, you're going to go to the top psychiatrist in the country and get them involved from the beginning to get their feedback and see where the issues are and like where we can add some value. And you start there, and then it trickles down because everyone that's looking for advice is looking up, right? So it's no different than looking at like the top influencer in I don't know, the tech space, or like the designers and things like that, right? So we started making a list of the people that were inspiring us. So like Tim Ferriss and Kevin Rose, and I think I had a list maybe about 10 different people that we were all listening to. For, like, most of them had podcasts, and we're like, these people, we believe in their message and it resonate, and we know that they do this stuff already, right? Like, so it's not a sell there. And just started reaching out in all possible fashions to get their attention, and ended up, I mean, we didn't get Tim Ferriss yet, but we've got a lot of his friends. So, Tim, if you're listening, we're still waiting for that interview. But basically just started from zero and got to the point where when we launched, we had a reach, not our following, but like all the people that were in the app had a reach of around 16 million people from nothing, right? So then all of a sudden we launched, and within a few months, we started getting a ton of Apple features across the world. And I lost count at this point, but at one point we were at around 145 country features, where we were either new apps we love or app of the day. In Canada and the US, we hit some sort of like start a digital journal lists, because now the App Store is doing these lists, and then they'll list out like 10 or 15 apps. So we've showed up on those. And I really believe it's because I think we've got a lot of good feedback on the design of the app. That's always been something. And this is where a lot of the Japanese kind of aesthetic comes in, and like just the simplicity and the minimalism. Like that's something that fuels a lot of our design. But then we have these big names and these experts in all of these different industries that, is not expected in a journaling app. You would expect a ton of meditation coaches and like yoga instructors, right? Which we have those people, but we also have, Michelin star chefs and writers and designers and technologists and all of these different people, because like, coming back to, those are the people that, can relate to the normal society, let's say, right? That, the people in these office towers here in Toronto, like those are the jobs. Is they're product managers, they're, QA specialists, they're data scientists. So, those are the people we're trying to get their insight into how they're conducting their mental fitness on a daily basis, because they're all doing it.
And so when you have this list of people that you admire, like, I think that part's probably the easy part, where you've had all these years of listening to all these top people. So you have that list, the stream list. And what was the initial like beginning period, like when you're sending all these cold emails? Like, how long was it until one of these famous influencers that everybody else wants the attention of, decided to reply and say, all right, let's chat? Like, what was that first one like, and how long did it take to get there?
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of them are still ongoing, to be honest. I mean, I just shared content this morning from Tim Ferriss. So, and that's been years now, right? So I think I was going to say recipe, but I really don't think there's a recipe. It's always, there are key factors, let's say, that can increase your probability of reaching these people, or I should just say developing a network in general. And I think you need a bit of a balance of going after the big ones where all the noise is, and just actually getting content in. So the first interview was this guy Mitch, who runs a cafe in Montreal called September Surf, and I was doing a lot of work in the cafe early mornings there, and got to know him really well. And basically how and this is what launched, not the podcast, but just launched the whole concept of us doing interviews. Because the first, I think we did maybe 30 or 40 interviews that were written, and then we eventually transitioned to a podcast. But the whole thing was that here's this, from the outside, this really popping, busy, awesome cafe, which it still is an awesome cafe, but in reality, the owner was struggling, right? Like this was a new business. It was tough. And he was like, yeah, I'm using Headspace. I'm trying all these different things. It sounds like what you're building sounds really cool. I could really use that. And I just remember thinking like, interesting, like no one would ever expect this from this owner of this cafe that seems in the outside and it was doing well, right? But it just goes to show like everyone's going through the ups and downs. And, he was an entrepreneur, no different than kind of you and I. And eventually just said, do you mind sitting down? Like, I'd love to interview you and just talk a little bit more about, that process. And then that's what really kicked things off. And then, then the other ones kept going and whatnot. And then all of a sudden, people started kind of within the network that was already built, started grasping at the fact that, okay, these guys are interviewing people, like I can introduce you to so-and-so. And so forth. But you start to quickly realize that the world, especially in tech, is much smaller than what you would think. Like people are, and you can see it often just even if you're on Instagram and you look at, you just followed someone and you can see where the common followers are. And then all of us, and I still do this to this day. Like if I'm trying to get to someone, and now thankfully that we have a good roster of people, like let's say it's, I don't know, the founder of Peloton or something. Like I'd follow him and see, okay, well, who are the common contacts? And I'd say almost 40 to 50% of the time, there's at least one or two, sometimes even 3 or 4 similar contacts. So then I'll try to find the person's email and I'll compose an email and say, here's what we're up to. Our values are aligned. And here are some past guests. So they're not the latest 5 guests. They're the guests that I know he follows. Right. So now it's no longer me making the sell. It's the person's friends making the sell, for example. But before that email goes out, there's usually weeks of, if that person has a podcast or sharing content, I'll interact with that content so that, and this is where maybe the last name comes in because it's a little bit of a unique name, but you start seeing it. Like Tim Ferriss for sure has heard of Kyo and my name. Even though he has millions of followers, he's retweeted stuff that I've sent out. So he knows. So it's just a matter of time that we end up in the same room somewhere or at an event or a conference. And the thing is, at least the way I see this happening is that, again, it's not me saying, hey, Tim, like we're really trying to build up this mental fitness app. Would love your support. Know that you're really big into journaling. This could help a lot of people. Like he knows that stuff, but it's more like, no, like Kevin Rose, Dario Rose, Scott Belsky, like all these different people that he's interviewed himself already in the platform. Right. So like that was a strategy. The initial list was like the hub, and then now it's kind of spider webbed out, but they're all connected in a way. So I think for anyone trying to do it is put out your wish list. Start following the work, start understanding who that person is, for example, and then just start working through it, right? But you're going to get a lot of rejection. You're just going to get no's. Most of the time, you're just going to get nothing at all. And I think that's where we've had to use or at least I've had to use our own practices just to stay, motivated and be like, is this even worth it? Like, why am I doing this each day and going through this? But it is, because at the end of the day, I mean, the practice like this has saved lives in the past and can greatly improve lives. So, that's why I'm sending follow-up emails. It's not to increase downloads. It's literally to hopefully create a positive impact on this world. So I don't care if you feel like you're getting bombarded by me. It's not coming from a place of like we're trying to make a ton of cash. I mean, I think we talked about this before. I mean, this is not a gold mine. If you're looking to make a ton of money, don't go develop an app. That's not the place to do it. So you have to be really invested in the purpose of why you're doing this, right? And it's fun. Like I enjoy playing that networking game and trying to connect with people. And then when it happens, and then you hear them on the other side of the mic, or if they agree to, put content in, like it's really gratifying because it's people are benefiting on the other side, but the byproduct, so am I, right? Like, and you know this too by interviewing people, like you get a lot out of it, right? Like you're learning personally from people all around the world. So yeah.
I think that's beautifully put. There's I don't know who said this quote, but there's a quote where I think I'm gonna butcher it by paraphrasing. It's the author gets more out of writing the book than you'll ever get reading it.
Yeah, totally. I can relate. Yeah.
And I think, yeah, like it's definitely there in like that process of constantly reaching out, meeting more people. And you've been on this journey yourself for about 3.5 years now. And I think I've hit that kind of just gone past that kind of 1 year mark of my own. But even that 1 year has just been like a weird roller coaster of emotions and everything. And like I have to do my own meditations and journaling. Like I had a period when I stopped meditating and I had to just go back to it out of a need just because I felt I was losing my mind.
Sure.
And I'm wondering for you, after you left that pharmaceutical world, like, even though you had this plan, like you were an experienced product manager, you kind of had an idea of, okay, this is how we're going to execute everything. What was that like first year, 2 years like actually going through it? Like, did you have moments where you thought, okay, I'm going to go back to the pharmaceutical, I can't do it, like, or we're running out of the money runway, we can't do it? Like, what was it like?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I think, and Scott Belsky talks about this, and he has a book out that's really good. I encourage people to pick it up. It's called The Messy Middle. And because we're actually in the messy middle right now, and a lot of people don't talk about that. Like, there is a lot of discussion around, you know, is this actually going to work? Right? I mean, there's people downloading the app, but like, can we actually create a viable business so that we can, you know, keep delivering, you know, value to people, but also like we have families, right? As well. And I mean, those are questions that come up all the time, and we're always pivoting and trying out different strategies. Like, we've tried so many different things, to make certain things stick, right? It's not just like the app is one thing, the podcast is another. There's corporate initiatives that we're playing with. There's an education piece that we're exploring right now. And like, you don't get to those levels until you try things, right? Or experience it. Like, the first 6 to 7 months are like a honeymoon. It's like everyone, and this is what Scott Belsky talks about, like everyone's excited. It's a new idea. It's like, wow, that's cool. I can see, you know, where you want to go and what you're doing. So awesome. And then there's this whole middle piece that sometimes could be, you know, years and years. And typically, from what I'm seeing, is 4 to 5 years. Like, if you look at even the Calms and Headspaces of the world, which are, you know, the largest meditation apps in the world, you know, we really only started hearing about them when they were 5+ years into their journey, right? Like, Calm and Headspace have been around for 10 years. Like, they're not brand new, right? But like, so what were they doing the last 10 years? That's the thing that no one talks about, right? You only hear the big press releases or the big rounds of funding raised, which are usually at the tail end of things. So that whole messy middle in between is where companies either survive or just die, right? And then that's where all the, you know, the ups and downs are, where we have to use our own practices just to stay, you know, mentally sane, to keep trying and iterating. But it's also where the true magic lies. Like, that's where the conversations like these happen, and like meeting new people and you know, failing at something and really testing your mind, figuring out, okay, well, that didn't work, but like, where can we go next? And all of that stuff is tremendous amount of like personal development. And it's too bad. Like, I think it's happening more and more, but it's too bad it's not talked about more, because that's the reality. And Gary Vee talks a lot about this as well. It's like there's this illusion on what entrepreneurship is. It's not all this glamorous stuff that it's made out to be, because, you know, in that middle, if you're not doing it for the right reasons, like, that's where you'd be like, I'm done. I'm going back to the pharma world, or I'm going to go, you know, grab another job that's a little bit more secure or has benefits, or like whatever it is, right? Yeah. So, I mean, I think you really need to be dialed in on why you're getting involved in it from the very beginning.
And then for you though, so when you're going through your messy middle, when do those thoughts come at you the hardest? Like the thought you entertain of, I could go back to the farm world. Should I go back to the farm world? Oh man, like, there were some good times there. Like, do you ever entertain those thoughts? And if you do, like when, at
Yeah.
what hard moments do
Yeah.
they come back to you?
Less about pharma, just because I think as a person I've evolved a lot, and not just like my values have changed in terms of just health in general. I'm much more interested in preventing disease from happening, either like through diet or whatever the means is, versus trying to put a fix after it happens, which at least from my experience in the pharma world is typically more of that, like let's fix it, or let's adjust something in the body when the disease is already there, for example, which has its place. Like, don't forget, I mean, anyone that is really hating on the drug world, most of the time, like when you're in your if you're at your absolute sickest, you're going to want something, right, to help you. Like that's just reality, right? So, because I don't want this to come off as I'm knocking that industry, because I learned a lot and I have a lot of good friends in that world. But when those thoughts come up, it's usually financial related. Like, I have a 3-year-old, I have a wife, financially it's really tough, starting a company and not knowing if you're going to get paid, this month or the next. Then we have a team that we're accountable to. So that's when the self-doubt comes in. And I think that happens for everyone. At least it comes up in interviews that I've done. But it's just a matter of, again, like, if you really truly, like, with every being in your body, you believe in what you're doing, then it's just an opportunity to rethink or reprioritize or dial yourself back in. And again, I think this is a big thing that I found has helped, but pull from the list of non-negotiables in your life. Like, I have a list of maybe 10 things that I know immediately make me smile or make me feel good, like exercise, meditation, going to an art gallery, or just like taking in art or fresh air, or eating clean, staying hydrated. So in those moments when things are bad or don't feel great from a mental perspective, I know I can turn to that toolkit and just pick any one of those to do and flip my mind or flip my mood. And that's been a big help day to day.
I'm gonna try that one. Yeah, like I have a list of non-negotiables, but the practice of going back to it and reminding myself that, oh yeah, I have that now.
Yeah, I mean, my goal is I always try to have 2 to 3 of those items on the list in check weekly. And I know, like, you can feel it in your body when you don't. But it is when you are in those higher stress points, where you catch yourself in that kind of self-destructive narrative, because that's all it is. You start forming these narratives, right? And you start projecting out, like, months in advance, something that hasn't even come to fruition, but your mind is spinning, right? And that's obviously, it's anxiety. But if you can break that pattern by, again, even asking a question like, what was awesome about today? Like that last meeting you had was like, that was great. It was a great step in the right direction, right? It can completely change your mood and pull you out of that.
And do you feel that, or do you think that that kind of mood that you were in prior to being pulled out of it is like, we think it's the reality, but it's not? It's kind of like another conjured up version of this negative, I don't know, environment that we're just so afraid of, and we're just like, that's probably it, and we just try to like latch onto it out of fear.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to I'm sure there's studies and science and stats and stuff related to that. I mean, I can just speak personally, and then also from the interviews from like hundreds of people. I think the majority of the time, those are self-created narratives that really don't end up coming to fruition. But when you're in them, they feel very real and can do a lot of damage, right? A lot of damage. So, whatever you can do to stop that cycle and pull out of that. And there are a ton of things, a ton of practices that can help. And there are a ton of practices that I feel help to even just get you to the point for you to notice that you're in one of those loops. Like that's the most common theme that I have seen from the interviews I've done. That all these top performers, whether it's personally, professionally, or both, have a very high sense of self-awareness. And that's happened through, years of prioritizing the training of their mind. And they're all different practices. They're all finding ways to do that work for their routine, work for their life. But they are prioritizing that just like you would prioritize, going to the gym or trying to eat, somewhat healthy. And then it just compounds over the years, and then you start seeing it. So that's the other thing that, you asked just kind of about the highs and lows and stuff about this world. I'm always wondering, because it's definitely the hardest thing I've ever done, jump into this. But at the same time, it's also the most self-aware I've ever been because of just, following our own practice and what we're picking up from the interviews. So, how much is it that all of that stuff existed and now I'm just feeling it and seeing it versus like legit stress or, just challenge and just launching a business. I don't know the answer to that is, but it's probably a combination. But what is nice is knowing that, we're not alone. That's a big thing. Everyone, goes through their own journey in some capacity, and there are a ton of tools to help, get you through it.
And in terms of actually building out the mental fitness and actually becoming more self-aware, and how do you measure your own improvement in mental fitness? Is there because I feel like it is a very subjective thing to yourself, where there are moments when I would feel it, where I just randomly feel at peace with something, or how recently I've started seeing, it's like a weird shift where my relationship with money has evolved to something completely different now than it used to be a year ago. But it's only happened after about a year of this. And so, but how do you measure the improvement in your own mental fitness?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds very similar to be honest. I don't measure it analytically, because sometimes I'll look like, oh, how many, when's the last time I meditated, or in Kyo you can see obviously the dates of your entries, and there's a calendar view of that, seeing, okay, well, there's been a bit of a gap. Those are the kind of surface level measurements. But I think what I've noticed over the last couple of years is just more and more days where I truly feel present. And circling right back to how we started this conversation on Kyo being, the Japanese word for today, but really being present today, being present for this conversation, and the whatever interaction is going to come next, and not being spun into thinking, okay, what do I have to do tomorrow? What's on the agenda? Just being there, right? And being able to, and you can feel that. I had it to this morning. I did a spin class, just like a self-guided spin class early in the morning. And there was a moment in the spin where I just felt really, I don't know, it was hard to explain, but just physically alive and super, from a mental perspective, super motivated for the next steps to Kyo. So for me, that means, that's my judge of success when it comes to just doing these practices day in and day out, right? I don't journal every day, in the sense of in the app or in a physical notebook. I'd say I'm reflecting daily for sure. Meditation is not a daily thing, but it's whatever you need, at least whatever I need today, I'll kind of pull from that toolkit and make sure I'm doing something. At least daily I'm doing something for my mind. And it could be as simple as taking a few moments, just take a couple deep breaths, and setting an intention for the day, or just saying thank you or whatever, right? It doesn't have to be huge. These small little micro moments of reflection have tremendous value in your day.
I'm gonna take a note of that. I say that because as you're telling me that, it made me realize about how, although I have all this big mindful practice of I journal every day, every morning, every night, I meditate every day, but it's sometimes there's that kind of, I feel like I'm losing being present by forcing myself to do it every day. Like there's this guilt that I miss a day, and I'm like,
yeah. We
like,
turn it into competitive. It's funny. I've heard that before too.
Yeah.
It kind of goes against the practice. And keeping in mind it's called a practice because we're practicing, right?
It's true. No, that makes sense. Man, there's so much more I want to talk to you about, but in the interest of time, as we kind of wrap onto the final legs of the interview, I wanted to ask, if it's a common question I'd like to ask all my guests, but if the 20-year-old Marc were to look at what you're doing right now, building Kyo and not in the traffic or in like the big skyscrapers, what do you think the emotional reaction from that Marc would be to where you're at?
Wow, that's a powerful question. I think that 20-year-old wouldn't understand what I'm doing right now. I think the emotion would be confusion and like falling into the stereotypes of like, what is that? Like, what kind of hocus pocus kind of work is, are you doing? Because at that time, I was just starting in that field, and didn't have the education to see that, all the people I was looking up to at that time were practicing things like this. So that's where I think like the journey, going back to that journey is just so important, because you pick those things up and you as a person evolve along the way. Like never in a million years would I thought I would have gone into the like a sound bath with like crystal bowls and stuff like that. To me was hocus pocus, right? And still is for a lot of people, but you start meeting these individuals that like it's really backed by a lot of science, and you're having educated conversations around this and you feel the benefits. So for me it would be like, wow, like there's a whole other world that has opened up, that I'm just super excited to continue to explore, because it seems endless. Like I just don't see a drawback to continually training your mind or upgrading your mind.
Is there something that you wish you had known when you're at that 20-year-old state that you could impart that wisdom? If you could go back in time and tell that Marc, like, just consider this one thing. You might listen to like 10 things, but listen to this one thing.
I don't know. I mean, I think I would have tried to, maybe the one thing would be like listen more intently, or be more present when listening, because I was consuming a lot of that type of content, but maybe it was just like half listening, or not really taking it in for what it is, because as a young kind of 20-year-old, it's really focused on like the career and like what was the next step, and working one job for 2 years, and then then you're going to go here, and I need to do this and that. Is a very typical path, right, in the corporate world, and that's what I was super focused on. But I mean, I learned a lot going through that process, and it's actually coming back kind of full circle now that we start entering into the corporate world when it comes to mental fitness, coaching or training or sharing the insights that we're learning at that corporate level. I've had the 10 years of experience to see what happens in those buildings, right? So yeah, I mean, I think it's all just part of our journey and evolution. And like, if you project out 10, 20 years from now, I'm sure I'd look back being like, oh, you shouldn't be so stressed out with the financial stuff. Like, just believe and keep going, right? Which we do, but I mean, it's also reality, right? For a lot of entrepreneurs just trying to, spin up a business and keep it, sustainable and keep it moving in the right direction. So we'll see. I'm excited to see where we go. We've got a lot of really cool tech initiatives coming, a lot of predictive technology that we're working on to hopefully help even more on the mental health side of things, and just keep, breaking down the stigma when it comes to mental health, but then really trying to shift that narrative around like, this is fitness for your mind. And I really think in the next 5 years that mental fitness will be as talked about as physical fitness. It's going to become a norm. You can already start seeing it. And we're seeing like big investment in like the comms of the world and this space. So it's super exciting. I think I think we need it. There's a lot of science showing that we need it, and it's fun to be part of the building blocks, because even in the last 2 years, just seeing the change in people accepting the language and what this stuff it's skyrocketed.
Mm-hmm. No, that's definitely true. And Marc, thanks so much for coming to the podcast. And is there anything you wish that we had covered that we didn't cover for the chat today, or that you'd like to share for our audience? And if you can talk about that, or you can also share where our audience can find Kyo and how they can get involved.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I'll leave one thing. I mean, first, you can find us. It's pretty easy. Just Kyo app, KYOapp.com. And then that's our social handle as well on all the channels. We're probably most active on Instagram. And you can find me, Marc Champagne, with the C. And it's spelled same as the bubbly on LinkedIn and all the platforms. I'm super accessible. And then the podcast, obviously, is Kyo Conversations. So, please tag along. Happy to have you there. And then I think the one piece is just for anyone listening that wants to get started in any type of practice like this, just, again, set yourself up for success. Pick something that seems interesting, that you've always wondered about, and just try something, super micro. If it's meditation, maybe, just try a couple minutes or 5 minutes. There's a lot of great free apps that you can get started on where you can do 5 minutes, but just give it a shot, right? Like, give it a good week of doing it and prioritizing it. If it's journaling, the usually the best times for success on that is either first thing in the morning or the last thing you do before you go to bed. And going to bed is really a gratitude exercise, usually on looking back on the day and seeing what was great about it. And then the morning is just really setting up your mind with a positive frame of mind, with like an intention setting or whatever. I mean, whatever you want to reflect on, but just start somewhere and start small.
Excellent. Marc, I really enjoyed our chat today, and thanks so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your story with my audience and myself.
Yeah, thank you. It was super fun.
All right. Thank you for listening to the podcast. I hope the story was inspiring to you. Hopefully it also helped you expand your perspectives. Hopefully it also made you question the default path that you might have been going on, or the default beliefs you might have had. And maybe now it'll make you even think about doing something about it, doing something different, maybe challenging yourself, being courageous. Who knows? But regardless, I'm really happy that you took some time out of your day to listen to this fantastic story with my guest. And if you would like to somehow, in some way, contribute and help support the podcast, and maybe even just be part of the community that I'm trying to build with the greater OMD Ventures platform, really think about being a stakeholder in the platform. And the quick way to do that is to go to my website, oldmandan.com, and go to the stakeholders page. I believe it's oldmandan.com/stakeholder. And the link is also down below. And that's how you can figure out how you can subscribe, follow to get more updates on the free content. But at the same time, also donate. And donate by actually just buying me a coffee. That's just how I put it. And you can buy me a coffee a month, coffee a week, or coffee every day of the year. And think about it as the way that, if you wanted to chat with me, you might just bring me out for coffee and buy me a coffee. Or if you wanted to bring one of my guests out to chat, you might buy them a coffee. So just think of it as I'm the service that's doing that for you, so you can just pay me in coffees. Don't worry, everything will still be free. It would just really help if you would like to show your support this way, so that I can use the coffee money to buy myself actual coffees, and also to buy my guests actual coffees, and use the leftover money to actually grow the platform, as well as even keep it operationally alive as well, because all this isn't really free, and it does take a lot of time to build it as well as operate it and hopefully grow it further. So your support would be amazing if you would like to contribute. And so, yeah, just check out the website, go to the stakeholders page, and read the different kind of benefits you might even get as a stakeholder. All right, thank you.